Hello, awesome people. I hope you are having just a absolutely majestic day today. Today I'm going to be doing something fun for you folks. I'm going to be taking a look at my top 10 fantasy films from the 80s. This is a sequel to the pre-80s one that I did for fantasy because fantasy wasn't that popular at that time. There were only a few things here and there that made fantasy sort of things. You know, they were typically children's or special effects driven things, that sort of thing, right? But in the early 80s, there was a film, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, that because it actually charts, that put fantasy on the map in a major way. It's a huge hit, made a lot of money, and it put that sort of a thing on the map in a major way for you folks. And so the 80s is definitely a decade that had a lot of great films. So I'm splitting up the 80s and the 90s into two separate decades for that reason, because of how popular a lot of great fantasy films were in the 80s for you folks. So I'm going to get started. Top 10. Now, as a reminder, this is spoiler free, so I'm not going to be doing deep dives. Please don't do it either in your comments below. Please respect the people that might not have actually read these and such, or watched these, or heard of them even. That's fine too. So let's start with our honorable mention. Our honorable mention is The Little Mermaid. This is a retelling in animation form of the short story, the fairy tale, and then it's got fantasy elements in the characters of the mermaids and the undersea stuff, and a lot of the world building that happens. You know, mermaids are obviously a fantasy thing. They're in things like Dungeons and Dragons and such like that, totally fantasy, and so forth. And a lot of the creatures and characters in the underworld stuff I consider in the fantasy genre for you folks. And so that's our honorable mention. Now, top 10 proper. Hitting number 10 is not nearly as cult classic. It's probably more of a cult classic. It's Dragon Slayer for you folks. In Dragon Slayer, basically the idea is that you have a protagonist and some antagonists and so forth. And these are people that are out there trying to fight a dragon that has come up to punish their kingdom and so forth. And so you have a lot of folks, and these folks that are attacking it aren't exactly the biggest name characters, if you will, in the area, like a magician's apprentice and that sort of a thing. Love it a lot. And it didn't do well in theaters and so forth, but I think it's actually a little better. So you're probably a little bit more of a cult classic for you. But that's number 10, Dragon Slayer. Number 9 is Time Bandits for you folks. This is done by one of the Monty Python group and so forth. The idea here is that you have some characters that are moving about in time into different characters, different concepts of a piratic nature, and so forth. And so there is a fantasy element here too, although it's probably also some science fiction too. You know, typically science fiction has time travel, but time travel has appeared in hardcore fantasy stuff, arguably. Dragon Riders of Pern has it, but the Dragon Riders of Pern is also set on a colony of people that ride dragons and so forth. So it's probably more science fiction than fantasy anyway. Like a science fantasy, if you will. Kind of like Star Wars 2 is science fantasy. It's got elements of both. So you might argue that it's science fiction, but I wouldn't. But I would probably consider elements of both, if you will. That's Time Bandits for you folks. Number 8 also did very, very well. And just recently had a Disney Plus show for you folks, and this is Willow, written by George Lucas for the person who is playing some of his characters in the Ewoks and so forth. And it stars a character, an entire world that was created from Val Kilmer's Mad Mardigan to the ladies of Forks and the evil people. An entire fantasy world is created with a lot of fun stuff in it and so forth. And one of the things, it's great stuff, heavily influential. Lots of people grew up on it on DVD or VHS, rentals, or watching it on cable, right? And so forth. It's also one of the first things for special effects nerds, because it has special effects of the morphing kind of thing. You will have characters morph from one side to another here too, and so forth. So that's also kind of cool too for science effects fans and such. So there you are. That is Willow for you folks. Number 8. Number 7 is Gremlins for you folks. Now, Gremlins, as a reminder, is all about this journey between folks. You might consider it more of a horror comedy, if you will, although it has fantasy elements. So I think the core concept of Gremlins, these creatures are mischievous, and if you do things after midnight, or certain things with them you're not allowed to do, they'll turn into not mischievous creatures. They'll turn into sort of darker interpretations of themselves, if you will. I think that's a central core concept of is even though it has a horror aspect to it, I do think it's got more of a fantasy bend to it, if you will. So I am considering that to be fantasy. But again, your mileage may vary. If you don't, that's fine. Just tell me your list and have what's in it instead. That's fine. I'm not going to lose any sleep if you don't. If you just consider it more of a horror classics and such. Number 6 is fantasy. So this is a telling, if you will, of something that was in a science fiction genre. But this is more fantasy, and that's Mark Singer's The Beastmaster for you folks. Number 6 for you folks. In The Beastmaster, we are introduced into a world where our lead protagonist can communicate with animals, tell them to do various things, get information from them, see through their eyes, use the word of scouts, ferrets, all sorts of stuff like that. So that's The Beastmaster for you folks. It's heavily influential and so forth. It does have some sequels after hugely numbers on TV, which is where I saw it before on television, cable. But it just not nearly as good. I would not put that in my top 10. But The Beastmasters, I think, consider pretty good. Number 5. Now, our top 5 proper for you folks, and then number 5 is Excalibur, and so forth. A King Arthur epic like Excalibur is definitely a classic, if you will. Should be number 5. It's heavily influential, heavily great stuff, great acting, great concepts, great epics. And since it's Arthurian, that would be fantasy, right? Just like Monty Python hit the previous list for you folks, which is a satire of the things. So, and for you comedy science fiction, you comedy fantasy fans, hitting number 4 is The Princess Bride for you folks. Now, I do think The Princess Bride is good on its term, right? I've actually read the novel that this had come from. Right, so I do think it's good on its term if you accept it for what it is, just like Monty Python and the Holy Grail from the last weeks. But it was hitting number 7. This is hitting a little higher because I think it's a better film. But I think you need to take them on their merits. These are not some sort of text that will describe like the future or the has really. Right, that are just hugely influential, or these things that everybody seems to quote growing up, but they're not nearly as clever when you actually go and see it. Right, I think if you take it as it is meant to be taken, right, then you'll have a fun movie. Watch it once or twice and be done with it. Right, and so forth. I just don't think there's a lot of depth here. I just don't think that rewatchings and retellings have kind of like for example. One of my sci-fi things that hit at number 2 was Donnie Darko, right? Well, Donnie Darko, in the modern sci-fi stuff, Donnie Darko is a film that will benefit, right, from multiple re-watchings, retellings, multiple viewpoints, right? You want to show it with other people, right? But this one, it just is, right? And Monty Python and the Holy Grail, they're not this hugely re-watchable, I don't feel. You just watch them a couple of times and then I'm kind of done with it, right? And so, for all of you, Monty Python or Princess Bride things, they are on my list at 7 and 4 respectively, but they aren't better. I just don't think that. I think if you take them for what they were intended to be, I think that's fine. But constantly quoting them or going to bat for them, it's your thing, right? I'm not going to lose any sleep over it if that's who you are. If you think that Princess Bride is the best fantasy film from the 80s, that's fine. It certainly is worth it. That's why it's my 4th film. But I just don't feel like it's an urtext. That's why it's number 4. Number 3 though is an urtext, if you will, heavily influential, inspired entire genres of things. Also rated R film. Inspired spin-offs and sequels. And movies and TV shows of a variety of time. That's Highlander for you folks. In fact, there's even a format in Magic the Gathering called Highlander where you can only have just one of each card in the deck because the tagline there can only be one. So all these characters that are killing each other and beheading each other and then gaining their power afterwards. And so forth until there can only be one person left to rule the world. Don't watch it. The sequel does push it into a science fiction realm, but I just don't consider that canon, if you will. Sorry about that. Highlander Pierce. So I don't consider that. But this one is definitely, now to be fair, Highlander's more adult. It's an R-rated film, right? It's more adult. It has more adult themes in it and so forth. So, but I do think it's worth the number 3 spot on my top fantasy films of 1980. Now, number 2 is the film that I talked about earlier that was heavily influential. It's a huge hit out of nowhere. People weren't expecting it in this fantasy film. It's a sword and sorcery fantasy film based on Robert E. Howard's Conan the Barbarian, which is, of course, Conan the Barbarian, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. For you, absolutely classic of classics. Put him on the map in a major way. Not a lot of speaking parts. He does this. So I like his accent here. It definitely plays into the darker concepts of who this person is. It's a darker interpretation in a more modern concept of Conan the Barbarian for you folks. And again, put him on a map in a major way. And Fantasy 2, after everybody wanted to repeat the success of Conan the Barbarian, just like Star Wars a couple of years earlier had created a bunch of Star Wars clones. Now we'd have a bunch of Conan clones, right? And so forth. So I think that's pretty fun too. For you folks, Conan the Barbarian definitely worthy number 2. And if you want to put number 1, or Highlander number 1, or The Princess Bride number 1, they're all 4. Or shoot, even like Skeletor number 1, that's fine too. But my number 1 is my number 1. Absolutely and completely, and that is the Harryhausen special effects directed stuff. And I think this one's definitely stood this time is Clash of the Titans for you folks. It has been remade a couple of times with modern special effects. They don't really, I think, touch this in any way, shape, or form. For it, folks, the idea of Clash of the Titans is that it's set in Greek mythology, so that's where you're getting the fantasy elements like Pegasus and Medusa and Tritons and Kraken and stuff like that. And there are these Tritons that are clashing and so forth, and the gods are displeased. Perseus is out there and such forth too. We have the gods. We got Laurence Olivier. We got a lot of great stuff and heavily influential. I think Clash of the Titans definitely stands up and is my favorite. And also, I think the special effects in it, because they're stop motion rather than special effects, they're really great. And I think they're good stuff to go back and watch. So that's my number 1, Clash of the Titans for you folks. So here's my top 10, including the honorable mention. Once again, honorable mention is The Little Mermaid by Disney, the animated film. And the 10 proper. Number 10 is Dragon Slayer. Number 9, Time Bandits. Number 8, Willow. Number 7 is Gremlins. Number 6 is The Beastmaster. Number 5 is Excalibur. Number 4 is The Princess Bride. Number 3 is Highlander. Number 2, Conan the Barbarian. And number 1 is Clash of the Titans for you folks. So there you are. Those are my top 10 plus an honorable mention for the 80s. A heavily deep dive. Now we will do the 90s. Typically, what I've done with the sci-fi stuff is I split up the 90s and the 80s into one genre, one film. But I felt like going back to the fantasy ones and looking at the fantasy films that are actually released and so forth. It was probably better, more respectful if I just did one a decade, because I feel like we left out a lot of quality stuff from the sci-fi films because I turned them from one decade, like I'm doing with fantasy, into 2 decades. And I just combined them. I just did 3 overall: classics, 80s and 90s, and then modern from the century. And so I feel like I left out a lot of great films out there, and classics from the Crucible, from the Black Lagoon, to things like that. So I definitely wanted to do a deeper dive of fantasy. 90s will be next after this one. Then I'll start with the 2000s, which is heavily influential because of the Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter put fantasy back on the map in a major way. And then I'll finish with the last 15 years. And so forth in the last ones. So that'll be coming next, and so forth. So if you like this and you want to see those, hit the like button, the bell icon, the subscribe button, and then let your friends know, fantasy friends, movie fans, right, and so forth. Just let them know about that, and so forth. So what are yours, like I mentioned? What are your top 10? Let me know in the comments below. Where do you agree or disagree with mine? That's fine, let me know. Everybody's got different lists. It's just mine. I haven't pulled fantasy fans, right? This is just my list as a fantasy fan, right? And that sort of thing. So that's what I'm interested in. This is, again, your films, your lists are your lists. Absolutely 100% yours. My list is a canonical or the best list, right? It's just favorites. And then, as a reminder, this channel's name is The Worst Thing About New Books. It's a quote by a French philosopher, Jacques Joubert, who said that the worst thing about them was that they kept us from reading the old ones, and in this case, the old films. Can insert all the old classics, the good things, the things that made what we watch, what we focus on, and those sorts of things. I definitely enjoy this stuff too. So I hope you enjoy that. And then finally, I want to thank you so much just for taking some time out of your day and investing it and watching my video, right? Because we all have so many different things that are happening, right, in our lives, and we're pulled in so many different directions. So the fact that you spend this time with me, that's incredibly humbling, and I appreciate it so much. So thanks again, and have an amazing day.